Notice of motion.
Very wise ruling.
Number 19, Ms Webb to move that the Legislative Council notes the State Government's Tasmania Liquor and Gaming Commission Ministerial Direction Number 1, 2022, requiring the implementation of mandatory cashless card system for poker machines in Tasmanian hotels, clubs and casinos, including loss limits, breaks in play and optimal commitment for time spent playing and related matters.
The Honourable Member for Nelson.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise to speak to motion number 19 in my name on the notice paper. I can't imagine how excited members must be that here we are at just gone 8 o'clock at night and I've risen to speak on this topic that I am very passionate about, and members will be very aware that I like to discuss in some detail. However, this is a fairly straightforward motion, so I'm hoping that we can move through this and agree on this quite readily. The motion, Mr President, relates to a topic, as I said, that I've spoken on many times in this place at great length. The motion revisits the topic poker machine reform and harm minimisation because it appears we are seeing an exceptional opportunity to genuinely and substantially reduce the harm caused to Tasmanians and their families by pokies addiction being torn away by the Rockcliffe government, as it yet again appears to be doing the bidding of the politically powerful pokies industry lobby. I believe that is what we are seeing occur. Covert actions taken at the direction of the pokies industry to pave the way for a shameful retreat from the implementation of what is an evidence-based, expert-recommended and community-supported consumer protection measure. Mr President, the points of this motion lay out this disgraceful pathway that the Rockcliffe government is on, as it appears to be on again the very verge of utterly failing to prioritise the Tasmanian community's social and economic best interests over protecting the addiction-derived profits of the pokies industry. Mr President, the motion asks that the Legislative Council, firstly, point 1 of the motion, notes the State Government's Tasmanian Liquor and Gaming Commission Ministerial Direction Number 1, 2022, requiring the implementation of a mandatory cashless card system for poker machines in Tasmanian hotels, clubs and casinos, including loss limits, breaks in play and optional commitment for time spent playing. The 2022 ministerial direction mentioned here in the first point of the motion, Mr President, requiring the Gaming Commission to implement the mandatory cashless card system, did not come out of the blue. It's worth recapping here how it came about, so we're clear the order of events. In fact, that ministerial direction originated in the lengthy debate in both Houses of Parliament over the Future Gaming Market Bill, which was legislated here in 2021. No doubt, members who were in this place at that time will recall our extended debate on that piece of legislation. That parliamentary debate led to an initial ministerial direction, which was Ministerial Direction Number 1 of 2021, which was a direction to the Gaming Commission, which said it was to, and I quote, to investigate the extent to which facial recognition technology and player card gaming for electronic gaming machines in casinos, hotels and clubs could minimise gambling harm, and provide a report on the outcome of the investigations and recommendations as to the most effective method of implementing these technologies in casinos, hotels and clubs. That was the first ministerial direction. That ministerial direction, Mr President, asked the independent Tasmanian Gaming Commission for its recommendations, basically on the most effective method for minimising harm from those two areas specified. In preparing its report, in response to this direction, the Commission consulted widely and provided plenty of opportunity for industry to raise concerns and provide evidence in this process. As the Treasury's website states, and I quote, following the direction, the Tasmanian Liquor and Gaming Commission conducted a robust investigation that included targeted and public consultation, a review of national and international research and an independent feasibility study. End of quote. All the supporting materials for that investigation, including all submissions received from public consultation undertaken by the Commission, can be accessed on the Treasury website, including the final report produced, which was publicly released on the 15th of September 2022. Mr President, in delivering its final report in response to that 2021 ministerial direction, the Gaming Commission was very clear. Its report explained why facial recognition technology would only be marginally effective in reducing harm from poker machines and did not recommend its adoption, but rather provided ample evidence for the effectiveness, desirability and community support for a mandatory card-based system for using poker machines. That was its strong, clear, prioritised recommendation. The government's response to this report, which is also available on the Treasury website right now, stated this: the Tasmanian Government commends the Commission for the breadth of work conducted for the investigation and extends appreciation to stakeholders that contributed to the consultation. The Government has accepted all recommendations and will work with the Commission to implement the first statewide mandatory player card gaming system with pre-commitment in Australia, further strengthening gambling harm minimisation for the Tasmanian community. End of quote. That's the government's response to that report from the Independent Gaming Commission. This indicated the government was satisfied with the Commission's work in investigating these matters. The government accepted the recommendation to develop and implement a mandatory card-based system, and to give effect to that, the 2022 ministerial direction was issued, requiring the Gaming Commission to begin undertaking that process. I note, Mr President, the government's response to the final report of the Liquor and Gaming Commission also said this: the government anticipates that venues will retain a greater percentage of their turnover under the new FGM arrangements than under the current arrangements, even taking into account the costs of card-based systems. This indicates, Mr President, the government, in deciding to accept the recommendation for implementation of a mandatory card-based system, had considered the expected impact on the revenue of pokies venues and deemed it to be acceptable. In explicitly acknowledging that pubs and clubs, and I quote, will retain a greater percentage of their turnover under the new FGM arrangements than under the current arrangements, even taking into account the costs of card-based systems, the government has admitted that it had given a significant financial boost to pubs and clubs under the future gaming markets reforms. That's what is referred to there for those members who weren't here when we passed those reforms. FGM is the future market gaming reforms. And for total clarity, that was the change to the licensing model for poker machines in our state, where our state moved from a single licence to individual venue licences. Alongside acknowledging that this financial boost to venues under the new licensing model, explicit in this statement in the government's response, is that preserving the financial expectations of venues would not override the expert-recommended good public policy on harm minimisation in its commitment to implement CARD. Revisiting that statement from the government in its response to the Gaming Commission's final report certainly prompts us to question exactly how much, Mr President, of a financial boost have poker machine venues received in the first full year of implementation of that future gaming market reform, the first full year being the 2023-24 financial year. We're now well past that. The whole basis of that licensing model reform was to move from that statewide single pokies licence to individual venue licences. That restructured how the pokies profit pie, if you like, was divvied up. And under it, venues themselves would take a much larger slice of the profit pie than they had previously under the single licence model. How much, Mr President, of a revenue boost did venues get in that first year of 2023-24 under the new licensing model, compared to, say, the previous year as the final year under the old model? The answer is we don't know. In this state, unlike many other states, venue-based data for poker machines is not publicly disclosed. Venue-based data disclosure should be a responsible part of a regulatory accountability in this state. The pokies industry has always opposed and managed to stave off any such requirement, unlike some other jurisdictions, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland to some extent, who do have public disclosure of various venue-based data. So we don't have ready public reporting of how much of a revenue boost venues have received under the new model with their larger slice of the profit pie that they now take. But my guess is, Mr President, that it would be substantial. And the only reason to keep that secret and, for example, not make that data public would be because they're embarrassed about exactly how large that boost has been. And when I say they would be embarrassed, I'm referring actually to both the government and the industry. Mr President, maybe the Deloitte report, which is discussed in this motion and we'll get to shortly, will provide us with an insight into this data about the boost to revenue for venues under the new licensing model, because the data is very important if Deloitte are to look at potential economic impacts of the card. These newly acquired economic windfalls, financial windfalls for the pubs and clubs under the new licensing model would not be quarantined from the introduction, should not be quarantined from the introduction and the effects of the mandatory card. Those new super profits that they've been able to tap into with their larger slice of the profit pie are not a right to which those pokies businesses are entitled. They were gifted to them, and we should not be seeing any protection rackets to see them maintained and sustained. But, Mr President, back to ministerial directions. A key question, Mr President, what has the industry been doing since the 2022 ministerial direction for the Gaming Commission to implement the poker machine mandatory card? Given their history of secret lobbying and deals with the major parties, I'm sure they were not sitting on their hands doing nothing. Has the industry raised concerns about the pokies card? If so, with who? Is there publicly available records of any meetings or correspondence where concerns have been raised by industry? Is there any publicly available record of the response or promises made by government to any such concerns raised by the industry? Certainly doesn't appear to be, Mr President. The government's commitment to implement the mandatory card-based system of September 2022 was made well ahead of the start of the new licensing system, which came online on the 1st of July 2023. When implementing the new licensing system, the tender for the licensed monitoring operator, the LMO, which sits at the centre of operating that system, included that there had to be the capacity to include the mandatory card as part of the system. It was built in as an expectation, expected and planned as part of the way forward, responsibly regulating poker machines in this state. Certainly, Mr President, work has been underway in the Gaming Commission and the Liquor and Gaming branch of Treasury to progress the card system, the design and the implementation plan. In December 2023, the Gaming Commission provided key pokies industry stakeholders with a preliminary consultation paper, providing information about the design and function of the system, focusing on how venues and patrons will be impacted, including the practical impact of the policy on gaming machine play. Information on that industry consultation can be seen on the Treasury website, including the consultation paper that was prepared for industry. It's noted on the website that the consultation was confidential because of its focus, and no submissions are available on that website. Here's a key question, Mr President. Did industry respond to this consultation opportunity, this formal, undertaken by the Gaming Commission consultation on the poker machine card reforms? If they did, where are their responses? We know from comments made on ABC Radio in the middle of this year by the Gaming Commissioner that there was in fact no engagement at all from the industry with that consultation process, that formal departmental consultation process conducted over last summer. What an astonishing revelation. What other industry in the state would refuse to engage with a formal departmental implementation consultation process on a fundamental matter relating to its regulation? I'll tell you, Mr President, an industry that knows it is above good governance, that it is above robust policy making, and that it is above responsible regulation. That's who? The Tasmanian poker machine industry. An industry that knows it can throw its weight around behind the scenes in secret, demanding and getting far more favourable outcomes through political threats and promises than through engaging through proper process. That's who, Mr President. Another key question. We can only wonder at what point, and in what was no doubt escalating pressure from the industry behind closed doors, at what point did the government start thinking it might need to backpedal on this card? Moving on to the second part of the motion, Mr President. Point 2 of the motion reads, 2, acknowledges the Tasmanian Liquor and Gaming Commission's public consultation process on the implementation of the poker machine mandatory card, which closed on the 18th of October this year. Mr President, subsequent to the formal consultation process with industry over last summer, which we know was disdainfully ignored by the industry, the Gaming Commission has continued to progress development of the technical requirements of the player card. It recently called for public submissions in response to a public consultation paper that outlined proposed systems and sought feedback to help further develop aspects of the card-based system. The Commission's consultation was supposed to, and I quote, assist the Commission by providing views on the player experience and operational requirements for the system. And the feedback from consultation will be considered and included in the system design and implementation plans as appropriate. Excuse me. Submissions to this consultation, Mr President, closed on the 18th of October, 11 days ago. With horrible irony, this happened to be the same week we heard in Parliament that the government had secretly commissioned Deloitte Access Economics to apparently investigate the economic impacts of the planned poker machine card. We do not yet know how many submissions were made to this public consultation, the Commission's public consultation process, who they are from or what they say. I do know that, unlike the earlier industry consultation process, there actually have been submissions made. There has been engagement from the public, the Tasmanian public, to this Commission consultation process. I know this because a number of the key community stakeholders have shared their submissions with me, knowing I would be keenly interested. I thank any community members and community stakeholders that went to the trouble of investing their time and care in making a submission to that process. For some, let's be clear here, they were seeking input from people with lived experience. So for some who made submissions to that public process, it may have been quite a painful and challenging thing to do. It is unconscionable to consider that Tasmanian community members and stakeholders who have engaged in this way may be subjected to the betrayal of the state Liberal government in thrall to the pokies industry heavyweights if, as it appears, they are preparing to backpedal their way out of implementing the card. Mr President, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Gaming Commission and the staff in the Liquor and Gaming branch who have been progressing this work of implementing the mandatory card-based system. It is nation-leading work and it is shameful. It's in its clear and present danger that we see right now of it being discarded and dishonoured. Mr President, point 3 of the motion says this, that notes that statement provided on the adjournment debate by the Leader of Government Business in the House of Assembly on Wednesday the 16th of October this year that the Department of State Growth has engaged Deloitte Access Economics to undertake an analysis of the social and economic impact of the government's poker machine pre-commitment card policy. Mr President, the grip of the pokies industry on both major parties in this state through a combination of donations and political threats has historically seen industry dictate government policy, literally write it, in fact, in some instances, and limit effective regulation through their demands. That is fact, and nobody can stand up in this place and say otherwise. The ministerial directions of 2021 and 2022 seemed to be a change in this paradigm. Finally, it appeared that responsible, evidence-based public policy and consumer protection was proceeding regardless of industry power and the way in which it is exerted in this state. However, as I have already discussed, the industry have clearly been working furiously behind the scenes, seemingly seeking to sabotage this new dawn. Mr President, the fruits of this political influence came to light 2 weeks ago, dragged into the light of day in Parliament and likely a little earlier than had been intended by the government. On the afternoon of Monday the 14th of October, with the resignation from Cabinet of Mr Michael Ferguson, MP, the original decision-maker and primary champion of the card-based system within the government, it was immediately clear that the card was likely at risk. At this turn of events, correspondence was sent to the Premier from me and from other MPs, seeking his urgent confirmation of his government's commitment to fully implementing the card-based system as described in the ministerial direction of 2022 and under development these past 2 years. In addition to this, questions were put to the Premier in question time in the other place on Wednesday the 16th of October and Thursday the 17th of October. On Wednesday the 16th of October, the Premier's answers to questions put to him were less than satisfactory, and rather than allay concerns about risk to the pokies card, they inflamed them. In answering questions, or indeed perhaps more accurately, contorting himself in order to not provide a straight answer, the Premier raised a number of red flags, including these. He pivoted, instead of answering, to promoting the government's support of facial recognition technology and implementing that in Tasmanian venues, which we know, Mr President, the Tasmanian Liquor and Gaming Commission did not recommend and in fact said was of only marginal benefit in reducing harm caused by poker machines. Anytime any politician from any party gets up and starts talking about facial recognition technologies, they are parroting the pokies industry lines. They are acting as a puppet of the pokies industry because facial recognition technology is industry-approved technology that they want to see implemented. What that tells us, Mr President, is it will not be effective in meaningfully reducing harm. It'll be quite handy for the industry and for venues, could be part of a great marketing system, but it will not meaningfully reduce harm in the Tasmanian community. So when you see that happening, politicians of any party getting up and speaking about facial recognition technology, they are being a puppet of industry. So when the Premier pivoted to that, it's a red flag. The Premier also pivoted to raising issues about the economic effects and impacts on the hospitality industry and of jobs that might be caused by the card. Now that, Mr President, was a massive red flag. And later, that sitting day, on adjournment of the chamber, it became clear when the Leader of Government Business in that place rose to provide further information to the Premier's earlier answers in the day. And this is what was said on adjournment by Mr Abet's Leader of Government Business in the other place. Honourable Speaker, he said, the Premier was asked about the government's commitment to harm minimisation and the implementation of electronic gaming machine reform during question time. The Premier repeats that our government remains committed to harm minimisation. We acknowledge that there are concerns around economic impact and effect on jobs, which we must consider in the implementation. The Premier advises the government has requested advice from the Department of State Growth on the current government policy impact on the hospitality venues across the state, including tourism and hospitality election commitment, and the government's electronic gaming machine existing policy and the government's 2030 visitor economy strategy commitments, regional events. The Department of State Growth has engaged Deloitte Access Economics to undertake an analysis of the social and economic impact of the above. A report will be publicly released by the government. End of quote. Now, Mr President, there's a Dutch saying, I can't say it in Dutch and I think it's apt here, the translation is this: now the monkey comes out of the sleeve. Meaning, Mr President, now the hidden thing comes into the light. Now the trick is revealed. Now, in that, Mr President, that additional information slipped under the door adjournment in the other place at the end of a long sitting day, we see the monkey coming out of the sleeve from this government. A secretly commissioned report, not by the minister responsible for pokies card reforms, not within the development and implementation process being undertaken by the responsible body, the Tasmanian Liquor and Gaming Commission and the Liquor and Gaming Branch of Treasury. Rather, it looks like it has all been done through the Premier, where clearly the lobbyists of the pokies industry have found a more willing ear and clearly a more favourable response to the political influence they've been bringing to bear these past 2 years, Mr President. This is a playbook we are more than familiar with from this industry. Cries of impact on jobs and venue viability are the predictable first port of call. Remember, this is the industry that in 2018 said that the Labor Party's then policy of confining pokies to casinos only would put 5,000 jobs at risk, Mr President. It was a blatant lie with no backing in reality or data, and which was thoroughly disproven by an ABC fact check. And yet the industry were happy to shout it from the rooftops, as was the then Premier in support of them. This industry has form in making grossly exaggerated claims as it demands fealty from the major political parties in this state and brings them to heel through backroom political threats and deals. Lo and behold, Mr President, just yesterday, with predictable shamelessness, the loudest lobbyist for the pokies industry has come out with yet another utterly ridiculous claim. Steve Old of the THA stood in front of the media yesterday morning and said on the data they have, Mr President, that the introduction of the card-based system would close up to half the pokies venues in this state.
Lying again.
If the industry expect anyone to take that as anything other than a ludicrous exaggeration pulled out of thin air, Mr President, in order to bully the Liberal government, they must put the data in the public domain so it can be tested. A refusal to put their claimed data in the public domain can only be taken as an admission that the claim is simply made up for dramatic effect by Mr Old. And believe you me, that performance, Mr President, is getting tired in this state. We've been here before. We know emotive, unfounded claims such as this, no matter how loudly you shout them, are nothing more than a pathetic lie. It will be telling, Mr President, if the Premier stoops to parrot this lie this time. The then Premier in 2018 parroted the industry lies told then. Will Premier Rockliff have the self-respect to avoid such subservient boosterism? It remains to be seen, but right now he looks to be teetering on the edge of it. So, Mr President, here's a key question. What is Deloitte likely to report about the social and economic impact of the pokies card? Well, that of course depends what the intention was in commissioning the report and on the terms of reference defined to give effect to that intention. Which brings us to the next point in my motion. Point 4 of the motion says further notes that the Premier has not released publicly the terms of reference or contract provided for the Deloitte Access Economic Review. What was the Premier's intention in commissioning this report behind the back of his Treasurer, who found out about it in Parliament, behind the back of the responsible Minister for Pokies Reform, the Minister for Finance, behind the back of the Liquor and Gaming branch in Treasury, and behind the back of the independent Tasmanian Liquor and Gaming Commission? What was the Premier's intention in commissioning this report? And how will this be given effect to through its terms of reference? We don't know yet. We don't know, Mr President, because the Premier has been cagey about the origins of this analysis, and we haven't seen the terms of reference. The Premier has not released them publicly. So far, in the absence of open information, our only impression of this Deloitte report is that it has come about because the pokies industry appear to have demanded it. As a result, it starts off with little credibility. There is no reason for secrecy on this front. If the Premier expects Tasmanians to give any credence to the Deloitte report when it is released, he must step away from the shadow of secrecy in which it was commissioned and be open about its intent, its scope and its terms of reference. To continue to withhold these details simply perpetuates the impression of a furtive arrangement dictated by a powerful industry to deliver promised outcomes at the expense of the social and economic well-being of the Tasmanian people. Mr President, I do think it is worth being honest and upfront about the social and economic impact of poker machine addiction and harm in the Tasmanian community. Let's recap on that a little, shall we? A total of $186 million in losses is the amount that was taken from Tasmanians by poker machines in 2023-24. Evidence indicates around half, in this case let's say around $90 million, was bled from Tasmanians being harmed by pokies. And I'm just going to actually pause there for a minute, Mr President, to clarify something. Every claim I make in relation to poker machines, every bit of data I quote or evidence-based claim I make, I can point to a reference for it. I can point people to why I'm saying that and what expert has said it or shown it or researched it before me. I can say that. The pokies industry don't show their data. The pokies industry can't back their claims and point to references that back them up on everything that they say on this matter. I just want to make that point right here, Mr President. Evidence indicates around half the losses, let's say $90 million in the 23-24 period, was bled from Tasmanians being harmed by pokies. These Tasmanians don't exist in a vacuum. They're our family, our friends, our workmates, our community members. For every person harmed by addiction to poker machines, evidence says 5 to 10 people around them are also being harmed. With Tasmanian income demographics and our cost of living pressures, which we've already discussed today, the economic impact of addiction-derived losses of $90 million a year is devastatingly harmful. And it would absolutely categorically include children going hungry, mortgages and rents going unpaid, homes being lost, increased domestic violence, families breaking apart, debts being accrued and defaulted, employers and community organisations being defrauded, jobs being lost, criminal acts being committed, crippling mental ill health, and quite frankly, lives being destroyed. Mr President, these are the additional costs to both the social and economic outcomes of Tasmania when we're talking about the harm caused by poker machines. It's not just a straight 90 million being bled from people harmed by pokies, it's all the flow-on effects, the harm that bleeds out into the community. But these costs are not often readily included in cost-benefit type of analyses. Mr President, will Deloitte, in their analysis, include consideration of these costs currently experienced as a result of pokies harm? We don't know, because we haven't seen the terms of reference. In 1999, the Productivity Commission recommended a mandatory cashless card with loss limits as the best way to reduce harm from poker machines. The mandatory pokies card being implemented in Tasmania as we speak, because it's on its way, Mr President, we're 2 years into its implementation, will significantly cut the losses from addiction and will meaningfully reduce the human and economic harm. Any politician of any stripe stating their commitment to pokies harm minimisation is by definition saying they support a reduction in profit for pokies venues. Let me repeat that, Mr President. Any politician of any stripe stating their commitment to pokies harm minimisation is by definition saying they support a reduction in profit for pokies venues. I tell you what, it's a given that the introduction of the pokies card will affect revenue of poker machine venues. Their revenue will go down somewhat. That is, by definition, the effect of a successful harm minimisation measure. That $90 million is lessened. The $90 million that was taken in 23-24 from people being harmed wouldn't be repeated. It would be a lower figure. If we do not expect there to be an impact on the profits of venues, that would indicate an expectation the card will not be effective. So, spoiler alert, the Deloitte economic impact analysis will definitely indicate lower revenue for pokies venues as a result of the mandatory card. It's a given. That means it works. The government knew that from the time it responded to the Gaming Commission report that recommended introducing the card. Remember, the government response to that report in 2022, in accepting the recommendation made, said this: the government anticipates that venues will retain a greater percentage of their turnover under the new FGM arrangements than under the current arrangements, even taking into account the costs of card-based systems. So the government had thought about this and had decided that venues would still be ahead because guess what? They'd just gifted them the new licensing model, which gave them a bigger slice of the profit pie anyway, which was going to offset any impact the card may be having. On another angle, Mr. President, will the Deloitte analysis also include assessment of the positive human and economic impact of less pokies addiction and harm that will result from the introduction of the card? We don't know because, you guessed it, we haven't seen the terms of reference. How will this analysis weigh, I wonder, ruined lives against maintaining corporate profits? Will it model the positive jobs and growth created when money no longer drained by pokies is spent in other Tasmanian businesses? We know that money spent virtually anywhere else in our community other than into poker machines has a greater economic benefit. It generates more economic growth and jobs spent virtually anywhere else we choose to spend it. Will the model include the positive impact of redirected spending when we reduce the harmful spending into poker machines by reducing the likelihood of addiction? We don't know, Mr. President, because we haven't seen the terms of reference. Will this analysis take into account the recent likely massive boost to venue revenue under the new individual licensing model that came into play on the 1st of July 2023? We don't know that either because we haven't seen the terms of reference or the scope. Why this secrecy, Mr. President? What role did the pokies industry interests play in proposing and designing this Deloitte study? Who wrote or who had input into the terms of reference? What methodology is being used and who was provided with an opportunity to have input into that design of that methodology and the study? Will the study draw on industry data that is not publicly available? Because I can tell you, Mr. President, it would be entirely unacceptable to base this analysis on hidden data and release a report without also releasing that data so that it can be publicly known and tested. Mr. President, is the study perhaps already complete? We don't know. It's secret. It's behind closed doors. I wonder when the government expects to publicly release it. We don't know. Will the government be sharing the report with the pokies industry stakeholders before it's publicly released? I wonder.
They will.
How does the government expect the results of this analysis and report to inform the implementation of the pokies card? That'd be a good thing to have an explanation for. So many questions, Mr. President, so much secrecy. Premier Jeremy Rockliff has told the media that the Department of State Growth finalised the Deloitte contract in August or September this year, and the report would be released pretty soon. He also told the media that, to his knowledge, the Tasmanian Hospitality Association, THA, and Federal Group had not proposed the study, to his knowledge. But we know, Mr. President, that that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case. Things are often kept away, potentially, from political decision makers if it's going to be embarrassing for them to have learned of it. If it is the case, and this is a straightforward situation of a legitimate exercise in gaining more information to inform the implementation of this card, why the secrecy? Why have we not seen the terms of reference? Why wasn't that put out straight away when it came to light that the study was underway? In fact, though, why was there not a media release back in August or September, which is apparently when the contract with Deloitte was finalised by the Department of State Growth? Why was there no media release from the government telling us about this excellent study taking place to help inform the implementation of the card? We see media releases for pretty much anything else that the government is doing on any given day, patting themselves on their back. How come this wasn't part of the 2030 strong plan for this state, Mr President, with a media release to go along with it and bells and whistles? Why is the study taking place given where we are at in progressing the poker machine card and all the opportunities that have been there for concerns to be legitimately raised in accountable ways through formal processes? The introduction of this card has already been delayed by 12 months. Will this study lead to further delays or even the abandonment of the card altogether? It looks quite like it's being set up to provide a rationale to backpedal, and that would be exactly what the industry would have been demanding behind closed doors, Mr President. Every delay in the implementation of the proposed card is a win for the gaming industry. Every single delay. The recent data, if we look at, say, the August losses to poker machines in this state, tells us that more than $524,000 a day is being lost to poker machines in this state, $500,000 a day. Losses since the 2018 Pokies election are now more than $1.1 billion in this state. That's only 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago, Mr President. Glenorchy, Launceston and Devonport LGAs. Those are the hardest hit LGAs by pokies losses in the state, particularly Glenorchy. I know there are members here who find that very disturbing. Which brings us, Mr President, to the final point of this motion. 5. Calls on the government to release immediately the terms of reference for the Deloitte Access Economic, Social and Economic Impact Review of the Poker Machine Pre-Commitment Card Policy as commissioned by the Department of State Growth. Mr President, this is a simple call on the government and the Premier for transparency and accountability and integrity. It should be easy to agree to this, and in the interests of rescuing this work from its murky and secretive origins, the Premier could act with integrity and respond to it promptly. I hope members in this place will support this motion and this call that it makes, this simple call. Members need not share all my views or all my concerns in relation to poker machine regulation, but I think most would recognise this is a modest and reasonable call which can be readily supported. I trust members will feel concerned, as I do, at anything that is done by a state government in relation to a powerful vested interest that appears to be secretive and hidden and behind closed doors and counter to an appropriate good public policy process that is playing out in the public domain. It's highly disturbing. This motion is an opportunity to put reflections on that on the record, and at its conclusion it makes a modest call which I invite members to consider and support.
Question is that the motion be agreed to. The honourable member for Nelson in reply.
Thank you to members for contributions on the motion. I appreciate engagement with it very much. I understand the leader correctly. They're rejecting the call to release the terms of reference. It wasn't clear to me whether she said they're taking it on notice. I don't know why they take it on notice given that the motion's been on the books for some time and they could have just said yes or no to it now. However, we'll see. Excuse me, Mr President, I'll get my water. We'll see how we go when we come to a vote anyway, if necessary. It's an interesting topic to be discussed.